So good morning, this is Paul Fury. Welcome to this morning's webinar, How to Fix the Broken Conversation. So what have we got for you? Well, basically my aim, as usual with these webinars, and if you're new to this, is that you get more than just information, something that you can actually take away and have a go at. And today is particularly practical because I suppose it touches just about everything we do at work and in our relationships at home. Conversations are things that we are very used to, and we're very used to them going wrong. And if you think about the films that we watch, the radio that we listen to, what plays are made of, what books are all about, is conflict, things going wrong. And that's part of the frisson, isn't it? Or maybe that's most of it. The things going wrong, and then the hero or the heroine figuring some way to do it. Now, at work, obviously what we're trying to do is to make things happen. We're trying to lead teams. We're trying to make a board function, an executive team, to make decisions. So getting conversations right is important, but what's even more right is knowing how to repair one, how to fix it when it's gone wrong. And my hope is that by the end of this morning, you will have at least a couple of things that you can do to practically make a difference to a conversation, even today. So what I'd really like to do is to get you to chip in first of all, and I'd like you to give us an idea, give me an idea of how you currently fix conversations. How do you go about repairing something when it's gone wrong? So you're in a conversation, you're having a chat, you notice things are going wrong, or maybe it's probably not a chat, it's probably more likely a discussion or a heated discussion, or where you're trying to pitch an idea. What do you do now to try and get it back on course? What's your standard operating procedure for things going wrong? So share that now in the questions tab if you have ideas for or if you know what you actually do to repair conversations currently. Have a think about that. I'll give you a second. Okay, we've got Robert. So Robert asks questions. Kate says, can we stop for a moment and go back? Marion stops and summarizes. Dom takes a pause to defuse. I'd be very interested to know, Dom, how you actually defuse. Kerry, stop and pause, give the person time to say all they wish to. Gosh, we've got all the wrong people on the webinar this morning. You all know what to do already, but kidding aside, there's a strong, the first ideas that are coming out so far is about stopping and pausing, and that's a fantastic start. It'd be very interesting to see what you have to say when we go on to the details. Hugh's here this morning. Good to see you, Hugh. What are you doing? You actually start listening to the objection. Very good idea. And Linda too is listening. So stopping and pausing is something that seems to come quite naturally to many of you. So what we're actually going to do is to dig down a bit deeper and say, well, let's see what we can do with those pauses. But firstly, I want to spend a few minutes on why conversations go wrong in the first place. So I've got really there's three things that struck me that most often make things go wrong. The first is that very often, and it's the most obvious one, an issue comes up, and of course, not surprisingly, because we've all got a brain, preferably something a little bit better than a fish brain, but I'll come on to that. We have differing views about it, and we see things very differently to each other. And that, of course, adds variety, and we all tell each other that it's great to have diversity of thought and approach and style, but actually often it really gets in the way, it really gets annoying, particularly when time is short, and that seems to be mostly the case for us. So that's one thing. We have differing views, and that can make things go sour very quickly if, as some of you said, there's not much listening happening. The second thing that happens is that one of the people will start to roll out their logic, their pretend logic, and what's actually going on for them is that they're getting annoyed, they're getting wound up. But the way they handle that is to come out with ever more, quote unquote, clever ways of rebutting the other person's arguments. And actually what that does, as we'll see in a few minutes' time a bit later on, is that actually also in itself can make things go wrong. And the third thing that happens, and most of you will have recognised this, or maybe even been the offenders, we actually can also start to insult each other, even by inference, even very subtle things that we can do and say, tutting somebody, frowning, embarrassing them in front of colleagues, it can make things turn very nasty indeed. And this, as you know, all happens on a sixpence. So what we're going to do in the next few minutes, up until about 10 o'clock, where we will sort of break, or 5 past 10 when we break for questions, we'll try and explain some of the background to this, and of course culminating in what you can actually do to make it go better. So what's actually going on here? Well, the problem is, and in fact there are some terrific books around, and there's more and more material coming out all the time, not just because of the work that people have done in the neurosciences, but also there's some great social psychology going on, and some great writing on how our minds work, not just the brain but the mind. And it used to be the case that we thought that there was this what was called still is called the reptilian brain. So this reptilian brain here, and this thing was responsible for all the very visceral, instant reactions, not a lot of thinking, and then the limbic system, which kind of sort of sits around it, sort of in here, and there's another very sort of primitive part of the brain here. That was all basically doing all the illogical stuff, and we thought that actually it was only then that our more logical bits of our brain, the sort of the upper cortices, all the grey matter as we refer to it, that was having a constant struggle against our feelings. Now, to a degree, that's absolutely right, but it happens in a very different order, and actually it's more complicated than we thought. Surprise, surprise. And what seems to be the case now is that we actually see something, and when we see it, we start, or we hear a rustle in the bushes or something, sort of some half information, and then our big brain, not only do we notice it at a very visceral level, but that then sets us thinking about what it might be like. So we start to make predictions using the whole of our minds of what is going on, what could happen, what do I need to prepare for. And it's only then, when we've got ourselves going and we've started to imagine the worst or the best, that we actually start to interpret those sensations and our physical reactions as feelings, and we give them names. So it all happens really rather the other way around to what we've thought for many years. But it's this deal between how we are, the actual visceral sensations or the effect, and what we think that's about. And so what we're about this morning is trying to get a handle on those thoughts, those assumptions, and actually fix the visceral stuff, the actual sensation that grips our bodies, that changes our chemistry, changes the actual sensations that we have in our limbs. And there's a couple of things that I'm going to come on to later that we can make a profound difference through doing. So that's a bit of the latest series. A fantastic book. I'm just reaching for it now to share the title with you. Is How Emotions Are Made by Linda Feldman Barrett. It's hot off the presses. A great read. I'll reference that for you at the end if you wish me to. Okay, so that's why some of the things go wrong, and that's very, very quick treatment. That's actually what's happening. Now, why don't we just do the right thing? Well, we don't do the right thing because actually we can't. For the most part, we're not really educated that way. And one of the things that a lesson that we're often taught very early on as children and at school and all sorts of things is that feelings and logic don't mix. And the implication is that if we're having feelings about something, and worse, if we're actually demonstrating those feelings, then we're obviously not thinking straight. And what I hope I've already expressed in some very scruffy way is that feelings and how we make sense of the world are very much intertwined. Without the feelings bit, we can't make sense of the world. And in fact, there's a really clever drawing that I've actually pinched from the book that I've recommended. So that's the payoff for you, Linda. There's a drawing that she puts in here. And this, for me, is a metaphor. It's not actually the point that she's making. So have a look at this illustration and have a think about what you think that is inside that grey rectangle. I'm going to give you a few seconds to try and figure out what you think you're seeing there. Any ideas at all about what that might be? Put it up in the questions tab, see if you've anybody's guessed. Or even say, no, I have no idea. So we get an idea of... Gremlins, says Lisa. Ink blots, Marion. Ian says, don't have any idea. No idea, Siobhan. A face, Kate Rush says, no idea. A cat, literally no clue. Birds, no, face and hand. Somewhere. I was, looks like a monkey in a photocopier. That is so close, Lindsay. You have no idea. Actually, no, it's not. Here it is. I couldn't make this out at all. And the irony is, I'm a beekeeper. And my brain just wasn't doing the right thing. So the point here for me, the metaphor I'm trying to sort of draw on, is that where we just have the sort of the line drawing of the thing without the grey area, without the depth and all the little messy detail that emotions bring, we don't know what's going on. We can't make things out. And in fact, people who have accidents suffer brain injury and lose the ability to generate emotions. Actually, there's a whole load of things they can't do anymore. They can't have relationships because they can't make decisions about who to trust and who not to trust. They can't see feelings happening at them and inside themselves. So they literally we are lost without feelings. So this business of feelings clouding emotion is absolute nonsense, because they are the important part of the picture that we use to actually make decisions, to have thoughts. And yet, in conversations when we have these emotions, it's very difficult for them not to get out of control, and then to know what to do when they do get out of control. And the fact is, as we're growing up, we're not taught what to do. We're not taught how to have an encounter that goes wrong. We're only taught nice things, but it's only when we get home, or we're told what to do, of course, and we probably think that's normal, but then we get out into the big wide world, we meet other children, and nobody says, well, this is how to have an argument. This is how to have an argument without hurting each other, without insulting each other, without feeling offended, without crying. Or, here's where crying belongs in the argument. So we don't actually get any emergency procedure for dealing with adversity, for dealing with just the simple I don't agree. And if we could work something out for ourselves, and if we'd only deploy it in a small proportion, like 1 in 5 or 1 in 10 in our conversations, if we knew what to do, if we didn't just get very worried and flustered, or the reaction that most of us developed, which is to get angry, then there are so many more conversations that would fall under our grasp, that we would be able to get through and to get to a really great conclusion, no matter who else or what else was involved. So, what is getting in the way? Well, as I said, brain chemistry. It lets us down. It gets in the way. It's extremely powerful. Our brains are highly developed, and it's only societally in the last, let's call it 50, 60, 70 years, where we thought, actually, we can change the rules in conversations. But for the most part, even now in university and school, you'll know if you've had sons or daughters just doing their GCSEs, what the stuff that they're taught is very much the same as before. You know, you've got to look out for yourself out there. You've got to have the correct argument. You've got to explain yourself correctly. And not only is this pressure to not only get it right, but to have the most powerful rationale, to have the thing that's going to carry the day, to look confident, to show leadership and all of those things. But we're also up against, or actually tending to ignore, the sort of softer lessons that we're exposed to, because actually they sound rather flaky, and we don't really believe that people who are enlightened and who go on meditation courses and pay attention to feelings and talk about feelings a lot, they actually count. I don't know if you saw last night on the television, there was a 10 o'clock news, there was an item about bicycles, and I had this stereotype instantly switched on. So here's a living shameful case in point. I made up my mind that these two guys came on, obviously in a bicycle shop, and they both had beards, and I immediately thought, people with beards, they're all very right on, and everybody on a bike rides, has a beard, which is ridiculous. But we actually we're taught to stereotype people, and we're taught that actually we have to be strong. And so forget about generosity, forget about assuming the nice thing, forget about compassion, forget about forgiveness. And actually what happens is that for the most part, rather like with fish, it is fear, when the conversation starts to go off the rails, that makes us behave. We pay attention to the feeling and the interpretations of that feeling very, very fast indeed. But we do, unlike fish, we do have choices. So what I want to share with you now is the 5 choices that you could make that are going to make things go even worse. And it'd be interesting to see who recognises these. And in the Q&A pane, if you want to say, yep, that's the one that I do, it would be great to hear that. Okay, so or at least to read it. The first thing that we can do to really make things go wrong is to pretend. Now, obviously, when things are going badly already, our tendency often is to pretend that it's not going badly, that everything's fine. I certainly remember growing up when I slipped up or tripped or was crying or was upset, I would be allowed, let's say 10 seconds of it by my mother, and then she would pick me up and try to cheer me up, or to tell me that whatever had happened to me wasn't that bad, and then I might get a biscuit or a glass of juice or something like that. But what that taught me, and there are millions of us around, to do was to pretend that I'm all right. Now, what's the problem with this? Well, firstly, it's confusing to watch, because we see somebody who's saying everything's okay and they're perfectly calm and okay, but actually their tone and their facial expressions and their body language tell us everything but that. So we don't know what to believe, and that's very distracting. It also leads to unpredictable consequences, because if they aren't prepared to tell us that they're not okay, unless we are very sharp, and we will come on to that in a few minutes' time, we can't do very much to help them. because they haven't admitted that they're not okay. But worse still, they will just get worse and worse because they'll be having to pretend harder and harder that everything's fine. So they won't be thinking straight because they'll be using so much of their mind to pretend and yet feel horrible inside that they will just plummet in their ability to have a conversation, and they'll do all kinds of weird stuff. So I know you probably can't imagine a poor fish dying, not even on an illustrated webinar. So here comes the rescue. And quite right, he's saying, twit, the guy needs to fess up to the fact that he is feeling horrible. So that's the first thing. Pretending makes things worse. Pretending to feel okay or pretending that nothing's going wrong in the conversation makes things worse. Okay, the second thing is to give in to the noise. So we've got someone here saying, can you see what I mean? And the other person is just listening to their own stuff. They don't care what they're hearing. They're just listening to the noise in their own head, and they're constructing their own meanings. They are constructing what they are about to say to the other person. And actually probably also constructing thoughts, opinions about the other person and the value of what they're saying. Very often you will see people doing this and you just know when they're not listening. They're staring off into the distance. They're looking at their notes. They're making sort of pretend noises to listen. You can see them nodding, but you think, you're not listening to me. I just know you're not listening. And mentally they have got their headphones on. And of course, we know that is extremely difficult to deal with, and in fact, it really tends to wind us up. So that's the second piece. Giving into the noise, our own noise, so that we don't listen to the other person. And of course, the other thing that we can also do is actually try and deploy this what people call the killer argument, when we're trying to dissuade somebody, but they have all the answers. They have the perfect reason why something should happen, and then they just keep on talking about it, or they come out with lots of big logical reasons for why it's absolutely okay for that thing to go ahead, even when everybody around them says it's catastrophic. The problem with the killer argument is that if you're the one putting it out to people, even if you're the most senior one in the room, even if it's the best logic, and you're not the most senior one in the room, but it's the best logic, you will switch people off. They may have to sort of subjugate themselves to you because you came up with that argument and they can't come up with anything better. But they're not going to be paying attention to it. They're just going to be wondering how fast they can get out of the room and then not do what you told them to. It turns into a battle of the wills. And if you've got a couple of people who have the killer whale, killer arguments, it can go on forever. And then, of course, it gets really heated. So thinking that we can win by the power of our logic puts us on a hiding to nowhere. After killer logic, there is, of course, the other thing that we do is to tell people that we think they're wrong. So we have people who decide to do different things, who choose a different path, who have different ideas, who bring something different to the table. And what we do is we write them off. We write off the idea because it doesn't fit. We put them in the wrong box. We say, you are wrong. And very often, even in organizations that are saying that they want to innovate, they actually reject it. And what happens as a consequence is that in telling people that we're wrong, it could be one-to-one, it could be a group, what we're actually leaking is a sense of superiority. It'll either annoy the other person into becoming stronger and therefore ruining the conversation even more, or, even worse in my opinion, they will actually believe you. Either way, the conversation gets degraded and ruined. And lastly, and this is probably the one that you will recognize if you have a team, you may have done this yourselves when people have tried to tell you something, give you an unpopular piece of news, or tried to explain something that you didn't want to accept. What you may have done is to actually pull rank on them and tell them that they were wrong. And because of your experience and because of what you know, that they're just plain wrong. So pulling rank, what's the problem with that? Well, it does, of course, sour the atmosphere, of course, but the little fish won't tell you it will. It has. And it gets you, this is the worst part, I think, gets a yes in the room. So people go along with it and say yes, even when everything in their minds is saying, no way, I'm not doing this. So what happens when we pull rank is we get an unreal conversation. It's no longer a conversation, it's a presentation, and everybody is having to agree with it. The second consequence is unpredictability. You don't know, as the person who's pulled rank, what's going to happen afterwards until it doesn't happen. The thing is that it's so often the case that things are agreed in the room, and the people who are there really are agreeing. They really do want to make it happen, but it can still go wrong. Now imagine a situation where the people who are saying yes aren't actually meaning the yes at all, because we pulled rank. So those are the 5 things that I think we can do to make things go worse. We can pretend that everything's all right when it's not, and then we send out weird messages and start to become more unpredictable, stronger, using stronger words, becoming more insistent, doing all kinds of crazy stuff. And actually, what we're not doing is admitting that we're not feeling right, that it's not going right for us, that we're annoyed or upset. We can give in to the noise. We can just listen to the words in our own head and blank the other person out, and then just go back and yes but them. We can deploy killer arguments. We can brand people as idiots and say that they're wrong. And then when all else fails, of course, we can pull rank. So those are 5 ways of making things go worse, or tampering with a perfectly good conversation and making it go wrong. So what I want to do now is to get on to some solutions. So what is to be done? How can we actually fix these situations, or these meltdowns that we help to create them. Here we go. All right. Well, fix number 1, and there is an order to these, and I'll explain in a moment. The first thing we can do, and is very often the most powerful when we are the ones who are feeling worst, and here's the rationale. If you think, you've pressed the pause button, as a number of you said at the beginning, you think, whoa, this isn't going right. You pause. If you take a view, then you look at yourself and you sense how discombobulated you are. You look at the other person opposite you, or the other people in the room, and the question to ask is, who's feeling the worst here? Is it me who's being the most disabled or thrown off course by my feelings? Or is it the others? Who's actually having the worst time of it? Now, in the case that you think, actually, I think it's me, relatively speaking, I'm the one who's the most upset, then it's time to deploy fix number 1, which is to deal with your stuff. Now, what do I mean by that? Dealing with your stuff, for me, is actually naming the feeling that you are having the most of, and what that feeling is about. So here are some examples. I'm worried. about where this conversation's going. You've got me worried, or you've got me really frightened about deploying this new solution. I was nervous at the beginning. Now I'm really worried about going ahead and spending this cash. So I don't know about you, but that language it's very normal language, and people might not even actually notice that you're deploying any kind of special fix. But the special bit, as far as I'm concerned, is this bit here, which is the feeling. That is the magic bullet for your feelings. Why? Rewind 15 minutes to the image of the brain. Part of the thing that's going wrong for you is the fact that your parts of your brain, the amygdala in particular, are producing a lot of neurotransmitters around fear. We often then translate those into something more useful, more capable, which is anger. So that reaction, barring its interpretation, is a chemical reaction. We then label it fear and anger. But whilst that's got a grip of us, it's extremely difficult to function intellectually. You will know this from your own experience, not being able to get your words out right, finding yourself saying things that you later regret. Actually naming the feeling that you're having the most of seems to have this strange effect, and it's not fully understood yet. But there is a part of the brain, and normally our brains are constructed in stereo, but this particular part only is in the right hemisphere. It's something like the right prefrontal cortex. And there's this little area that when we actually name the feeling that we're having, starts to work harder. The thought is that when we have to construct the name, when we have to recall names of feelings, that starts to work harder. But the curious thing is that the amygdala that were actually producing those neurotransmitters that gave us the impression that we were frightened or angry or whatever, they calm down. They stop functioning so much. And so actually naming our feelings has a neural effect on us, albeit that it's not fully understood, but we know that happens. So that probably gives some explanation to why when we share our feelings, we feel better. There is also, no doubt, a social explanation around acceptance and seeing that people don't think we're odd. And in fact, people paying attention to us and say, "Oh gosh, Paul, I'm really sorry, I didn't realise you were feeling like that," also, of course, helps immensely. So talking about our feelings works. This sort of first aid on ourselves works on a number of levels. We just need to be able to name the feeling and have the guts to spit it out, to actually say it. And people will tend, the vast majority of the time, to pay attention to that. If they don't, actually, somebody asked me the question at the end, what happens if they don't? I won't go into it now unless you're interested. What happens when people don't pay attention or, brush off our feelings? I'll come back to that in the Q&A if you're interested. Okay. So that's the first potential fix. So what's the second option? Well, remember going back to that judgment piece. If I judge that, actually, I don't feel too bad, but they look really annoyed or she looks really worried, then I can deploy fix number 2. I deal with his stuff, her stuff, their stuff. And what's that about? Well, that's about empathizing. That's about paying attention, not just to the words that you're using, but all the things that they're not saying, and most particularly, you guessed it, how they feel about it. Now this, for some people, is really tricky. I've been running some programs for a client in the last few weeks, and I always allow extra time for this, because people typically, we're very good at spotting feelings and emotions in other people, but actually we're not used to either naming them and certainly not used to calling them out. But that's exactly what I'm suggesting you experiment with, is to actually call out what you think you're seeing and hearing in the other person. You sound annoyed. You're obviously worried. You don't sound too keen. What we're actually calling out is a humble hypothesis. We're not trying to catch the other person out. We're trying to show them that we paid attention and that we're prepared to talk about the feelings. So a number of things happen when we actually have the presence of mind, when we can rise above our sort of fish brain level and actually think about the other person's feelings, demonstrate some generosity, some compassion. And that is a very tangible, sort of business-oriented, if you need a cover story, it's a good thing to do in the office. Paying attention to other people's feelings actually helps them to realise that somebody wants to understand them. They also get permission to talk about their feelings and to be even more honest. Empathy like this works much better than questions, by the way. Whilst we're listening to somebody and calling out their feelings, we also suspend our own pushing, the deployment of our own killer arguments, the deployment of our rank to win. And they will sense that. They'll realise, gosh, she's not pushing anymore. Something has changed in this conversation. And by listening to you, I get to really understand what's going on with you, and you get to see that I'm understanding. And whilst all that understanding is going on, things accidentally, incidentally cool off. Because all of a sudden we're focusing in on the feelings, not the stuff, not the logical stuff, but we're focusing in on the feelings as being the most important bit. And automatically they shrink into proportion of the situation. People feel better. I feel better listening to you. You feel better to see that I'm listening. And so the whole thing just gets reset. It completely changes the flavour of the conversation and actually can have a profound effect on the relationships involved, particularly if you build a tradition in a team environment or amongst a group of directors, on an executive team, or a team of any level. When a team learns to pay attention to actually say how they're feeling occasionally, wow, that really cuts through the BS in a big way. So those are the two fixes that we can deploy to help a conversation to completely reset and fix a conversation that can even have gone catastrophically wrong. Right, gosh, it's almost 10 past. I'd very much like to hear what your thoughts are. If you have any questions, inputs, things that you think, oh gosh, how does that work? Or I don't really agree with that, or I've seen that go wrong. Okay, one question here is, can I actually point out the feelings of somebody who is more senior than me or who I don't know? Can I point out the feelings of somebody who's more senior than me or who I don't know? Actually, feelings are so universal, one, that yes, it's fine. But two, and this is probably the most important bit, they won't even notice you're doing it. They won't know that you're doing anything at all except for being a human being. And besides, they're so upset or so frustrated anyway, if you are doing the listening, if you're adopting fix number 2, that they will just feel better about it. So rank and lack of familiarity disappears. I hope that's a good enough answer. A question from Claire. What happens if someone doesn't acknowledge your feelings? I'm just going to enlarge this Q&A vein. Doesn't acknowledge your feelings when you share them. Okay, thank you very much indeed, Claire. Okay, so what do you do when somebody doesn't want to acknowledge your feelings? Well, actually, what you do is to give them feedback on what it was like to be ignored. So Claire, and you would never do this, I know, Claire. If I were to say, Claire, I'm not comfortable with going ahead with your plan, and Claire said, no, don't worry about it. It'll be absolutely fine. I might say, or Claire says something even nastier, which is, really, I don't really mind whether you're comfortable or not. We've got to do it. I would then say to Claire, I'm really not happy with you brushing off how I feel like that. So I give Claire the feedback on what it's like to be given the brush off. Or I'm really not comfortable you saying that to me because it sounds like you're totally ignoring where I am on this issue. Hopefully that suffices. Okay, Cherise, I'm going to do a couple more of these and then we'll finish on the button, and I'll come back and do more questions after we've finished off. So, Cherise, I hope I'm saying your name right. How do you tackle staff who refuse to listen and amend, i.e. if there are legal requirements for roles, jobs, and you ask several times in different methods, explain importance, consequences, etc., and discuss why they aren't doing it, but still makes no change? When you discuss this, when not done, they become agitated straight away or cry to deflect. Oh my goodness, okay. So what to do, you're saying. What do you do when people don't pay attention? In fact, they just carry on doing the same thing again and again. I think that's what you're saying, and then break down. My instant reaction to that, Cherise, would be actually empathise. If you're not feeling too irritated yourself, you could say, I can see you haven't done this. You seem reluctant. It sounds like it's doing procedure XYZ is giving a real problem. And so what I would centre on is trying to find out why they are resisting so much. And I think you'd find some really interesting answers. And it may be that there's nothing wrong with what you're actually asking them to do, but it's the fact that they're being told to do it. But you won't know until you really listen to them. So whilst the tendency might be to police procedures and things that we try and get organisations, people in our teams to do, actually trying to find out why they're not doing it of their own accord. Because people generally come to work wanting to help, wanting to do the right thing, but trying to find out what's getting in their way and showing them that you care rather than you're just prepared to push them, I think will work best for you. There are a number of other questions. I do want to answer them, but I want to also make sure that I finish on time. So we'll just wrap up here, and then please do stay on and I'll answer all the other questions until we run out of questions. So in summary, final thoughts. What have we got here? Well, the first thing is, it's never too late. It's never too late to do something to help a conversation to get fixed. Even afterwards, if you notice that people are leaving the room disgruntled, there's absolutely no reason why you can't go around and visit a few desks, make a few phone calls and say, listen, I realised it went badly wrong. It's never too late. The second thought is just stopping, and a number of you pointed this out right from the get-go. Just stopping, just pausing is tremendously helpful, and so whoever's doing that, just carry right on doing that. I hope now that you have an extra ingredient to put into that pause that you have so cleverly created, which is to either pay attention to what you're feeling or pay attention to what they're feeling if you think it's bigger. And then recognise that feelings are the key. Forget the logical stuff. Forget what you're there to discuss. If you sort out the feelings between you, you fix the conversation. You might even fix, with a number of practices at this, the relationships, which sometimes are also a reason why a conversation has a very poor chance of going right. We haven't covered that today, but so those are the three things I would put your way to consider, to base an experiment after this session on. If you're staying on for more questions, I'll get straight onto those right now. So I think we responded to Cherise. And here we go. So Isabella said, if someone is already angry and you point it out, doesn't it escalate it further? Strangely, no, but it sounds like you're worried, Isabella, of making it worse just by pointing it out. You think that it'll make them even more indignant. It'll sort of stoke the fires. It seems not to. I'd put it more strongly. It actually has the reverse effect, because when people are getting angry, it's because often they don't think they've been paid attention to. So when we do pay attention to them, it immediately gets them to realise that they've got what they wanted, just not in the way that they thought. They've actually got something psychologically valuable, nothing to do with the tangible stuff that's actually being argued about. So what I would say to you, Isabella, is don't believe me, try it out. And maybe you can try it out in a scenario, if you're worried about it, try it out in a scenario where you weren't the cause of the anger or the annoyance. So you're helping somebody to recover, to get fixed from an encounter with somebody else. So instead of saying, oh gosh, poor you, or how ridiculous, actually focus on their feeling and say, you sound really annoyed, you sound really angry, and see what happens. It'd be great to hear what happens, Isabella, if you want to stay in touch on that one. I hope that's good enough. Lindsay asks, instead of talking about what you're seeing, is it not better to ask the person how they're feeling? I'm quite good at acknowledging when someone is feeling a certain way, but if they're not ready to acknowledge it, sometimes it backfires. I.e., you look upset about this and then they become defensive. So I wonder whether it's better to assume nothing and just ask how they feel. Good point. So you're saying that on occasions you've said something like, you look upset about this, and they have become worse. They've got defensive, and they've said, well, yes, because blah, blah, blah. Something like that, I'm guessing, Lindsay. Actually, when we do first empathise with somebody, a couple of things can happen. There are two variations. One possibility is they say, yeah, you're right. I feel really rotten about this, or whatever. So immediately you see, hooray, it's worked. The other thing that can happen is that it seems to make it worse. The feelings just go, boom, yes, and another thing, boom, 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 boom. And we think, oh no, I did that bloody empathy thing that Paul suggested and it's backfired on me. It hasn't. You're already making it better, but you don't know it yet. The reason you're making it better is because you've actually given them permission to say all the other things that are on their minds. And so actually by saying what you see them feeling, you give them permission to bring all the feelings they want to into the conversation and deal with, I guess we could call it, a backlog. So it's unlikely that you made it worse by mentioning their feelings, Lindsay. You probably just started a good process, but then got worried that you'd made it worse. So there's my take. I hope that's a satisfactory answer, Lindsay. Okay, Ciel. I hope I've pronounced your name correctly. Is it okay to walk away from some conversations? I'm guessing, Ciel, it's because you're finding it upsetting, or you feel insulted, or you think, I don't know what to do here, I've got to get out of here. Well, it's your right to walk away from something. The caveat to that, the thing that's just popped into my head, is walking away from a conversation when they feel really bad and you don't feel quite as bad as them. That would be perhaps, I think, that's a shame, a missed opportunity perhaps. But if you're feeling insulted or attacked or intimidated, you have the option to tell the person that you're feeling intimidated. I'm not enjoying this conversation. I'm finding you're shouting really hard. I'm feeling intimidated, actually. Saying that to somebody is absolutely fine. But if you can't, walking away, that's absolutely fine too, if you feel you need to do that to keep yourself safe. I'm making some assumptions, Ciel, about why you asked the question, but I hope that covers it. Isabella, Says, will these skills apply to telephone conversations in the same way? Absolutely. In fact, I did my doctoral thesis on empathy on the telephone and coaching telephone operators, telephone agents to empathise, and it made a huge difference. And in fact, I'm engaged in another project now all these years later, and we're doing just that. There's a big emphasis on paying attention to the feelings alongside, and in certain cases, before the facts. A tangible example, somebody's on the phone and they call in and they say, oh, you know, my boiler's burst, or, you know, my telephone's been cut off. And the tendency of an old school telephone agent would be, can I have your postcode, please? Rather than, oh, you sound really upset. Let me help you with this. What's your postcode? So by supplanting empathy, it completely changes the conversation for all the reasons that I've already explained. So yes, empathy on the telephone, being assertive on the telephone. Isabella, absolutely. Marion asks, you're in the midst of a conversation and have taken on board the comments of others, but when feelings come into it and you put across your thoughts, they become your perception. How can you move beyond that stage? Okay, I'm going to read this again. This is a subtle one, Marion. You're in the midst of a conversation and have taken on board the comments of others, but when feelings come into it and you put across your thoughts, they become your perception. How can you move? Oh, I see. They've had a lot of feelings and you begin to taint their view with the passion or the anger that they've imbued it with. I think that's what you're saying, Marion. In which case, if you have the capacity to, if you're not messed up in your own feelings, actually empathising with them will help you both to distinguish between the feelings behind what they're saying and what they're actually saying. So you might hear yourself saying things like, you sound really determined to make solution B the one that we use. It sounds like you'd be really annoyed, reading between the lines, it sounds like you'd be really annoyed if we didn't do solution B because XYZ. So by doing that, you help them to take account of how much emotion they're showing you. They will probably feel able to tone it down because the message has been received, and then you can maybe evaluate the thing for what it is in isolation. Quite a complicated scenario, Marion, but I would go definitely for empathy. I hope that is satisfactory. Tony, I have tried saying I felt uncomfortable about a certain course of action and this got me into a whole heap of trouble. How should I remedy this? Okay, I can read that question in a couple of ways. How should you remedy the original situation? We'll go back to them and find out if you really did cause any damage, or how, second interpretation of the question, how could I go about it differently next time? That's difficult for me to answer because I don't know how you said it the first time, but one thing to bear in mind is that if you're having feelings and you're starting to feel them building up, then speaking about them soon on when they're still small will be helpful, because it means that when you do finally say how you feel, the people around you haven't had the big build up. So in response to your question, it's go and find out whether you really did do any damage, Tony, or actually be clearer sooner about how you feel. I hope that does your question justice. Ian Davidson, I think they're just thank yous. Okay, one last one here from Mark. How do you get over the problem when the other person seems to not want to communicate? How do you get a conversation moving forward? So Mark, as I understand it, what you're saying is you get stuck when the person's doing the sort of silent thing, either on purpose or most probably because that's all they can manage. The answer there is again, well, actually it could go two ways. If you think you're feeling really uncomfortable, you could say, I'm worried that you're not saying anything, or I'm I'm worried that everything's not all right. You're quiet. So that's one thing. That would be fix number one, fixing your own feelings. Or this is you won't see this in the books. Penny for them. Penny for them. You seem quiet. So in both those cases, paying attention to them, empathy, fix number two, and then be prepared to do as much silence as they are comfortable with. So not using silence as a weapon, but giving silence a chance, because maybe that's where they have to operate. That's where they're comfortable, and you may be less comfortable. So I hope that does that question some sort of justice. Thank you very much indeed for joining. Thank you for staying on for all the extra injury time for the questions, and look forward to seeing you soon. We'll be sending out a cheat sheet to everybody of the main ideas of today, and also there will be a film, a 2-minute model on the way in about the next 3 weeks. It's in production now, and that'll be with you on a different topic, but I won't reveal that now. And then again, another webinar in the autumn. Have a great weekend, bank holiday, hooray! Let's hope the sun stays out. Take care, bye for now.